Question 1. What's the solution to the equation 2x plus 3 equals 7? So this is straightforward algebra. Just subtract 3 from both sides. You get 2x equals 4. And then divide both sides by 2. You get x equals 2. And your answer is C. Question 2. Which of the following is equivalent to the expression above? So this is going to be straightforward foiling, just like you learned in school. So 2x cubed times x cubed is going to be 2x to the 6th. 2x cubed times negative 2x is going to be negative 4x to the 4th. 3x times x cubed is going to be positive 3x to the 4th. And then 3x times negative 2x is going to be negative 6x squared. So just combine your like terms. You get 2x to the 6th minus x to the 4th minus 6x squared. And that leaves C for your answer. Question 3. The graph of y equals f of x is shown in the xy plane. What is the value of f of 0? So this is basically saying when x is 0, what is y on the graph? So x is 0 on the y-axis. Another way of looking at this is at what point does the graph or the curve cross the y-axis? And it looks like it's right around negative 8, possibly negative 7, because it's a little bit unclear from the picture. So looking at the answer choices, negative 8 is the only choice, and so A is our answer. Question 4. The city transit bus line charges $2 for an adult and $1 for a child to ride one way. During a certain 4-hour shift, the bus driver collected $11.71 from 617 riders. Which of the following systems of equations could be used to determine the number of adult riders A and the number of child riders C during this 4-hour shift? So this is a typical problem that the SAT wants you to know how to set up. In other words, we're given two measures. One is the number of tickets, which equals 617, and the other is the total number of prices or the total amount of money, which is 1171. So the easiest way to do this is, first, let's take care of the easy one. If A is the number of adult tickets and C is the number of child tickets, the total is 17. We're looking for A plus C equals 617. The only choice that fits that is choice D, which is going to be our answer. But if you want to make sure, just look at the other equation. If you're charging $2 for every adult, that means the money that you're going to make is 2A plus $1 for every child. That's 1C, and the total is going to be 1171. So again, choice D does match that, and that's why that's our answer. Question 5. In the xy plane above, a dilation with center O and scale factor 3 transforms triangle ABC to triangle DEF. Which of the following statements is not true? So basically what they're saying is that a dilation factor of 3 means we're magnifying the small triangle, and it's going to be turned into a larger triangle, which is 3 times the size. So let's look at what the answer choices say. A, the perimeter of triangle DEF is 3 times the perimeter of triangle ABC. So this makes sense because if you're magnifying the triangle, each side is going to increase by 3. So if each side increases by 3, the perimeter is obviously also going to increase by 3. So this is going to be true. B, the measure of angle E is 3 times the measure of angle B. This is not going to be true because if you enlarge a triangle, your angles are all going to stay the same. So angle A is going to be congruent to D, B is congruent to E, and C is congruent to F. So B is likely going to be our answer. C, the length of AB is 1/3 the length of DE. So this is the same as saying DE is 3 times AB, which is kind of what choice A is asking. So if you see two choices that are similar like that, you should suspect that it's not going to be the right answer. And choice D, angle A is congruent to angle D. Yeah, and that's exactly what we expect when we have two similar triangles. So that's going to be true also. The only statement that's not true is B, and that's your answer. Question 6. In the xy plane, the y-coordinate of the y-intercept of the graph of the function is C. Which of the following must be equal to C? All right, so let's just draw this out real quick. I'll assume that the graph is some kind of a curve or a line. It says the y-coordinate of the y-intercept is C. That means this graph is going to cross the y-axis at coordinates 0, C. And right over here, this is C. So let's look at the answer choices. It says, which of the following must be equal to C? So obviously A is going to work because f of 0 is saying when x is 0, y is C. And that's true because we have 0.0 C. That's going to be our answer. We have no information to judge what f of 1, 2, or 3 is going to be. because remember, this could have been any type of curve. I just chose to draw a random one. Number 7, the length of a rectangular tile is 4 times the width. If the area is 144, what's the width of the tile? All right, so it pays to just draw this out. It says the length is 4 times the width, so we'll call that 4x, and we'll call the width x. The area is 144, so just do length times width, which is 4x squared equals 144. Divide by 4 on both sides, you get x squared equals 36, and then square root both sides, you're going to get positive minus 6. And that's going to be x, which is the width, and so the answer is obviously the positive value, or A. Question 8. Which of the following is the graph of y minus 5x equals negative 6 in the xy plane? So it would help to get this into y equals mx plus b form, so we're going to add 5x to both sides. That gives us y equals 5x minus 6. The reason being, it tells us exactly what the slope, which is 5, and the y-intercept is, which is negative 6. So looking at all the graphs, again, keep in mind that each box count is 2. So the y-intercept for all these graphs is all negative 6. 2, 4, 6. So we have to look at the slope. Given that the slope is positive 5, I can immediately eliminate choices A and C, because if a line is slanting that way, it's going to be a negative slope. Only when the line slants this way is it going to be a positive slope. Now I have to actually calculate the slope. So again, let's take the 2 points that they have laid out for us and do rise over run. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 divided by 2. So the slope here is going to be 5. That's likely our answer. Let's just double check here. Same measurements, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 divided by 4. So here the slope is 10 over 4, or 5 halves. And so the answer is obviously B based on our equation. Question 9. The table shown gives some values of x and the corresponding values of f of x, where f is a linear function. So that's going to be important. If y equals f of x is graphed in the xy plane, what is the y-coordinate of the y-intercept of the graph? All right, so in case you're getting confused by the wording, the y-intercept of the graph is where the graph crosses the y-axis. So the x-coordinate of the y-intercept is going to be 0, and they're asking us to find the y-intercept, so this is our unknown. So given that we know that these values represent the equation of a line, that means it's going to have a constant slope. So the strategy is going to be calculate the slope between this point and this point. Once we know the slope, we can use that number to calculate where this point falls. So how are we going to do that? Slope is always rise over run, or change in y over change in x. So change in y is going to be 4 minus negative 2 divided by 2 minus negative 1. That becomes 6 over 3. So we know the slope is 2. Now that we know the slope is 2, let's plug in our other values. So 2 is going to equal y minus 4 divided by 0 minus 2. I could have chosen the first point also, but it doesn't really matter. So let's cross multiply. 2 times negative 2 is going to be negative 4 equals y minus 4. Add 4 to both sides, and you're going to get y equals 0. So the answer is actually that the line crosses the y-axis at the origin. And so the y-intercept is going to be 0, and the answer is C. Question 10. The equation above can be used to estimate the body surface area A in square centimeters of a child with mass m in grams, where m is between 3,000 and 30,000. Which of the following statements is consistent with the equation? So let's take a look at the equation first, just to get a general idea of what's going on. It's clearly a linear equation, and it looks like for every gram represented by m that you increase, the surface area is going to increase by 0.3433. Notice that 1321 is a constant, so that's not going to change. And if you're really confused by these types of equations, my recommendation is just plug in some easy numbers to get a sense of what's going on. So we got 1321. Let's assume that the child only weighs 1 gram. So m is going to be 1. And let's assume that the child weighs 2 grams. These numbers are going to be the same. And then m is going to be 2. So what you can see is happening is that as the mass increases by 1 gram, we're adding another 0.3433 to the surface area. So let's look at the answer choices and see which one makes sense. Choice A, for each increase of 1 gram in mass, A increases by approximately 0.3433. So that's exactly what we just saw. So A looks like it's going to work. Choice B, for each increase in 0.344 grams in mass, A increases by approximately 1 square centimeter. So that's not true because it's not going to increase by 1 square centimeter. It's going to increase by this number, 0.3433. So B is out. C, for each increase of 1 gram in mass, A increases by approximately 1321. So this is off also because remember the 1321 doesn't change. Choice C would be true if the 1321 were being multiplied by m, but that's not what's going on. Choice D, for each increase in 1321 grams in mass, A increases by approximately 1 square centimeter. So number one, mathematically that doesn't make sense because each 1321 that you add to the equation, it's going to add 1321 to the surface area. And also because there's no variable attached to this 1321, by increasing the mass, there's no way to increase the 1321. So D doesn't really make sense, and that leaves A as our answer. Question 11. In the xy plane above, points P, Q, R, and T lie on the circle with center O. The degree measures of angles POQ and ROT are 30, so we can mark those here, 30 and 30. What is the radian measure of angle QOR? So they want to know what this one is. All right, so the things that you should know for radian measures is obviously 0 degrees is 0 radians. Since the circumference of a circle has 2 pi r, that means 360 degrees is going to be 2 pi radians. So if all the way around the circle is 2 pi, 180 degrees is halfway, that's going to be pi radians. Half of that is going to be pi over 2, which is 90 degrees. And 1.5 times around is going to be 3 pi over 2. So those are your quadrant angles in radians that you should know. The other measures in radians that you should automatically know are 30 degrees is going to equal pi over 6 radians. 45 degrees equals pi over 4 radians. And then 60 degrees equals pi over 3 radians. If you memorize this, you should be able to get most questions that have to do with radian measure, because what you'll notice is that each of these angles is 30, which is pi over 6. So you've got pi over 6 and pi over 6 here. That's a total of 2 pi over 6. And since from here to here is 180 degrees or a full pi, you're basically just thinking in your mind pi minus 2 pi over 6 is going to give you 4 pi over 6. Reduce that, it's going to be 2 pi over 3. And that's why the answer is C. Now let's say you didn't remember any of your quadrant angles or any of your common angles. You could calculate the degrees first and then just convert to radians. So again, from point P to point T, that's 180 degrees. So subtract 60 from 180, and then you're going to get 120. So in here, angle ROQ is 120 degrees. To convert from degrees to radians, you simply multiply by pi over 180. When you do that and reduce, so you're going to get 2 pi over 3 radians also. And if you wanted to convert back from radians to degrees, it's really just the opposite. You multiply by 180 over pi. If you don't remember which way, just remember that radians to degrees, you always want to cancel out your pi's. That's how you can remember whether it's pi over 180 or 180 over pi. Number 12. For what value of x satisfies the equation above? So if you're looking at this and getting completely confused, you could try to test out the answers. The way I would do that would be noticing that neither positive 3 nor negative 3 for x can actually work, because that would make one of the terms undefined. So it's definitely not A and it's definitely not D. And then what you'd have to do is just plug in 1/2 and negative 1/2 and see which one works. Personally, I wouldn't recommend that method because I think it'll be very time consuming and you might make a mistake with the negative versus the positive. So I would suggest just doing it the real way. And what you want to do is whenever you have an equation with fractions, you want to use the least common denominator, or at least a common denominator, to eliminate the denominators. What do I mean? So for example, let's say you had an equation with 3 fractions, say 1/4 plus 1/6 equals, I don't know how many sixths, what you can do is multiply the whole equation by 24, that's 4 times 6, and the result is, because the 4 and the 6 will divide out, you're just going to be left with an equation with no fractions. So I'm going to do the same thing here. What I'm going to notice is that you should have memorized x squared minus 9 is the same as x plus 3 times x minus 3. So that's going to be your least common denominator, x plus 3 times x minus 3. And you're going to multiply each term by that because something will divide out. So in the first case, since the denominator is x plus 3, x minus 3, they both divide out. We're going to be left with 4x squared minus, in the second term, x plus 3 is going to divide out. So we're really multiplying 2x times x minus 3. And that's going to equal, in the third term, x minus 3 is going to divide out. So it's 1 times x plus 3, which is just x plus 3. So now the algebra is much easier. We have 4x squared minus 2x times x is 2x squared plus 6x is equal to x plus 3. And I'm going to subtract 4x squared minus 2x squared is going to give me 2x squared. Subtract x from both sides, we're going to get plus 5x. Subtract 3 from both sides, and we're going to get a nice quadratic that equals 0. So we're going to factor this. You know you're going to have a 2x on the one hand and an x on the other hand equals negative 0. So keep in mind when you're adding the other terms, it's got to be positive. So most likely over here, it's going to be positive 3 because 2 times 3 is 6. And here it's going to be minus 1. So either 2x minus 1 is equal to 0, which means x is going to be equal to 1/2, or x plus 3 is equal to 0, which means x is going to equal to negative 3. We've already eliminated the negative 3 because it creates undefined terms, so we're left with positive 1/2, and the answer is C. Question 13. A right circular cone has a volume of 1/3 pi cubic feet and a height of 9 feet. What is the radius in feet of the base of the cone? So what you should have memorized is that the volume for a cone is going to be 1/3 pi r squared times height. And so we can just fill in the values and then solve for the radius because we have the volume, which is pi over 3 equals 1/3 pi r squared, and the height is 9. So I'm going to multiply the whole equation by 3. And on the left, we're going to be left with pi because 3's divide out. On the right, the 3 divides out, and we're going to be left with pi r squared 9. Divide both sides by pi, we get 1 equals r squared times 9. Divide both sides by 9, we get 1/9 equals r squared. Take the square root of both sides, so r is going to be equal to positive minus 1/3. Obviously, we reject the negative 1/3, and so the answer is going to be A. Question 14. Which of the following is equivalent to r to the 2/5 times the square root of r, where r is not equal to 0? So the reason they say is greater than 0 is because you can't take the square root of a negative number without it being imaginary. So here, just remember that the radical sign is really a symbol, and what it means is that you're taking the square root of r. In other words, you're raising r to the 1/2 power. So I'm going to rewrite this as r to the 2/5 times r to the 1/2. And that's really what we're looking at. So keep in mind your rules of exponents, that when you're multiplying two numbers together, you add the exponents. So to add 2/5 and 1/2, we have to find the least common denominator. That's going to be 10. So 2/5 is going to be 4/10 times r. 1/2 is going to be 5/10. So 4/10 plus 5/10 is going to be 9/10. So it's going to be r to the 9/10, and that's going to be our answer, choice D. Question 15. A scientist tested a group of adults aged 30 to 85. The graph shows the quadratic function s, which models the scores on a language test as a function of their age in years. So this is scores versus age. Which of the following could define s? So they're basically asking which of the following is the best equation for this line. What you should have memorized is one of the formulas for a parabola is going to be y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. And this shows you that the vertex is going to be h comma k. And A, all you have to remember is if A is positive, the parabola opens upward. If A is negative, it opens downward. The bigger the absolute value of A is, the narrower the parabola is going to be. That's really all you need to know to solve this problem, because let's try to guess where the vertex is. Looking at the answers, it's somewhere around 50 and 55. So it looks like on the x-axis, it's about 55, and then the y-axis, it's about 50. So that's going to be 55, 50. And so going by our formula, it's either going to be B or D. So we can eliminate A and C because it kind of reverses the coordinates. And then the next question is, since the parabola opens downward, A has to be negative. So that only leaves choice B. Notice that we don't really have to care about what the value of A is because it's all the same. Question 16. On a 210-mile trip, Cameron drove an average of 60 miles per hour for the first X hours. He then completed the trip driving at an average speed of 50 miles per hour for the remaining Y hours. If X equals 1, what is the value of Y? So at first this sounds kind of really confusing, but keep in mind they're giving you the fact that X equals 1, which actually makes this a very easy problem. Because if they're saying that he drove 60 miles per hour for 1 hour, we know the distance that he covered. So just use the simple formula, distance equals rate times time. He drove 60 miles per hour for 1 hour, so therefore his distance was 60 miles, which intuitively makes sense, because if you're driving 60 miles per hour for 1 hour, then after 1 hour, you've only covered 60 miles. And now what they want to know is how much time did he spend driving 50 miles? Well, given that he traveled 60 miles on a 210 trip, how much does he have left over? 210 minus 60 is going to be 150. So we just have to use the same distance equals rate times formula, and we have 150 miles left to go. We know that he drove 50 miles per hour during that time. So really we just have to solve for t, divide by 50 on both sides, and we know that he was driving at 50 miles per hour for the remaining 3 hours on the trip. And that's going to be the answer. Question 17. In the equation above, what is the value of z when w equals 2? So this is simple substitution because there's only 2 variables in here and they're giving us one of them. The confusing thing about this is z and 2 are similar. So honestly, I think they wrote this question because they're banking on the fact that you're going to make a mistake when you're writing this out. So let's be very careful. 2z, and I like to put a line through my z's, and we're going to substitute 2 for w times 2 squared minus 3 times 2 minus 10 equals 2z. Okay, so this becomes 4 times 2, that's going to be 8z minus 6 minus 10 equals 2z. So that's 8z minus 16 equals 2z. Subtract 2z from both sides and add 16 to both sides, so we get 6z equals 16. Divide both sides by 6, we get z equals 16 over 6. If you want to reduce that, that obviously becomes 8 over 3, and that's what our answer is going to be. Question 18. X minus 2 rad x minus 3 equals 0. What value of x satisfies the equation above? So when you're looking at this, you should recognize that this is actually a quadratic, because if you know the standard formula, then you'll always remember that the quadratic term is the linear term squared, which is exactly what's going on here. X is the square root of x squared. So if we look at it another way, let's say a squared equals x, therefore a is going to equal radical x, or the square root of x, and let's just substitute. So a squared minus 2 times a minus 3 equals 0. And then this should be a familiar quadratic, so we're going to factor this. It becomes a minus 3 times a plus 1 equals 0. So that means a is either going to be equal to 3, or if a plus 1 is equal to 0, a is going to be equal to negative 1. And then we can resubstitute our radical x. So radical x is either equal to 3, or radical x is equal to negative 1. We reject this one because the notation suggests that we are only allowed to use positive numbers. Square both sides, we get x equals 9, and that's our answer. Question 19. x plus y equals 2, x minus y equals 3. If xy is a solution to the system of equations, what is the value of x? So with systems of equations, you can either use substitution or elimination. I'm going to use elimination because the first thing that I'm going to notice is I've got a positive y and a negative y, which will easily be eliminated if I simply add the two equations together. So let's do that. X plus x equals 2x. Positive y plus negative y is 0. And then 2 plus 3 is 5. Divide both sides by 2. I get x equals 5 halves, and that's going to be the answer. Notice that if they were asking for the value of y, it would pay to not add the equations but subtract them, because if you subtract the equations, you're going to eliminate the x's and then you'll be left with the y value. Either way, you could also use the x value, substitute it back into one of the equations, and then solve for y from that point. But this way was just the easiest. Question 20, we have this equation. In the equation above, k is a constant. If the equation has infinitely many solutions, what is the value of k? So infinitely many solutions means x can be anything. In other words, any value you plug in for x, the equation is still going to be true. So you can approach this in one of two ways. One way is to try to eliminate x, and I'm going to show you that right now. So 2k times x minus 2 equals x minus 2. Just visualize x minus 2 as something, and you're going to divide both sides of the equation by x minus 2, and you're going to get 2k equals 1. K is going to equal to 1/2, and that's one way to get the answer. So if that was confusing, just think of it as 2k times a equals a. All we did was divide by a on both sides, and we got 2k equals 1. The second way to approach this problem would be to try to make both sides of the equation equal to each other, because if we have x minus 2 equal to x minus 2, because they're saying the exact same thing, then clearly no matter what value we plug in for x, the equation is going to stay true. So what that means is, if you're more of a visual person, you could recognize that for x minus 2 to equal x minus 2, you really just need 2k to be equal to 1. Because if 2k is equal to 1, the equation just reduces to that, and you're looking at the same math. K is also going to be equal to 1/2. So whatever way is easier to do, either eliminate x's or try to get the left and the right to equal each other, and the equation will still remain true, and therefore if it remains true, then you're going to have infinitely many possibilities for x.